Hi everyone, we're back with another tech vid. Today I'll be showing you how to configure IPsec and SSL VPN remote access in Sophos Firewall version 20. First, I'll provide a quick comparison of the IPsec and SSL VPN protocols. Then, I'll go over the required setup in Sophos Firewall to allow remote access, followed by showing you the steps for both IPsec and SSL VPN configuration. Note, the Sophos Assistant also has an interactive guide available to walk you through the SSL VPN configuration process directly in SFOS. After completing these steps, you'll be able to set up the Sophos Connect client, which is covered in a separate tech vid linked in the description. Let's get started. First, I'll compare IPsec and SSL VPN. IPsec uses port 500, which does provide a more robust security. However, port 500 is commonly closed on home networks and must be open to ensure functionality. IPsec can also use port 4500, which can be used with NAT traversal. On the other hand, SSL VPN can be configured to use any open port, such as 443, which can make the initial setup simpler. With this in mind, you can decide which one best meets your needs. Now, I'll go over the steps for firewall configuration to allow remote access for VPNs. First, allow access to services within the Sophos Firewall. To do this, go to Administration, Device Access. In SFOS v20, you'll see a new column for VPN Portal in Other Services. For more information about the new VPN Portal functionality, refer to the tech vid linked in the description. Under the WAN zone, allow VPN Portal. This gives users access to the Sophos Firewall VPN portal when setting up the Connect client. Under the VPN zone, allow ping, DNS, and VPN portal. Ping and DNS are optional, but can help when troubleshooting connectivity during the initial setup. VPN portal is enabled to give users access to the Sophos Firewall VPN portal over the VPN. Click Apply to save the changes. Next, configure a firewall rule. The policy created allows traffic from the VPN to the LAN and DMZ, since remote users need access to these zones. Note, this rule may differ depending on your environment, so make any required changes to suit your needs. Now, I need to create an IP host to specify the range of this rule. This should cover the IPs used for IPsec or SSL VPN. In the dashboard, go to Hosts and Services, and make sure you're in the IP host tab. Click Add. Enter a name for the local subnet. You have the option to set a single IP, subnet, range, or list of IPs. We recommend specifying a network, but use what is most compatible with your environment. Once that's done, save the policy. Next, navigate to Rules and Policies, and go to the Firewall Rules tab. Click Add Firewall Rule, New Firewall Rule. Enter a name for your rule and add a description if needed. Enable log firewall traffic. Set rule position to top. Rule group can be set to none. Under the source section, add a new item to the source zones and select VPN. For the source network, specify the IP host we just created. Under Destinations and Services, add a new item for the destination zone and select DMZ and LAN. Again, this rule allows traffic to be initiated from the VPN to the LAN and DMZ, and not the other way around. If you wish to allow bidirectional traffic, modify this rule accordingly or create a separate rule. Now, go ahead and save this rule. With the firewall setup covered, I'll get started with configuring IPsec. If you plan to use SSL VPN instead, skip ahead to the next section. To configure IPsec, go to Remote Access VPN. IPsec. Enable IPsec remote access, then select the interface where the firewall will be expecting the connections to come from. Note, if the firewall is not the border router and doesn't have a public IP, you need to port forward port UDP 500, UDP 4500, and the ESP protocol with IP protocol number 50 from the upstream router. For IPsec profile, I'll use the recommended default remote access profile for encryption. However, you may choose to use a different profile based on your company requirements. You can easily create or modify the profiles in your settings. For authentication type, select Pre-shared key and enter the phrase. Local ID and remote ID can be left empty. For allowed users and groups, enter the users and/or groups, including synced Active Directory groups, that will be able to connect to the firewall. Now for the client information. Enter a name for the connection. In Assign IP From, enter a range of IPs that the firewall will provide to the users of Sophos Connect. Make sure this range doesn't overlap with any network you have in the interfaces of the firewall, an SSL VPN or L2TP, for example. We also recommend that you avoid using common ranges found in home and office networks, such as 192.168.1.0 and 192.168.0.0. This will help to avoid routing issues with the end user's local network. Whatever range you choose, ensure that there is a corresponding firewall rule to allow traffic from that network. If you want to set static IPs for Sophos Connect users, enable the option Allow Leasing IP Address from Radius. For DNS server, enter the IP of the DNS server that will resolve names when using Sophos Connect. Also, make sure to add this IP into the permitted network resources, which is found below in Advanced Settings. If you want to disconnect idle users, simply enable Disconnect when tunnel is idle and enter a time in seconds. Now, let's move on to the advanced settings. The first option is Use as Default Gateway. When enabled, this will pass all traffic, including regular internet traffic, down the tunnel to the firewall. Keep in mind, this will reduce performance as the firewall will have to process more traffic. However, this allows for more reporting information for user traffic. You must also modify your firewall rule and add the WAN as a destination zone. The next field is Permitted Network Resources. Select the networks and IPs that you want users to have access to behind the firewall. Only the traffic specified in this list will be sent over the tunnel. As mentioned before, when adding your DNS server under the client information, make sure to also add the IP of the DNS servers here. For endpoints that are protected by InterceptX, you can take advantage of synchronized security. Select Send Security Heartbeat through Tunnel to have the endpoint's heartbeat packets go through the VPN tunnel. The Allow Users to Save Username and Password option will let users save their credentials for future logins. The Prompt Users for 2FA token is used when configuring the Sophos firewall with OTP. Configuring this adds an extra layer of security. The Run AD logon script is useful when you want automatic scripts provided by the domain controller to run as if the user was inside the office. We commonly see this used for mapping network shares. If you want to enable Connect Tunnel automatically, you must enter the FQDN of a server inside your organization so that Sophos Connect can determine if the user is off-site and needs to connect. For example, if we set dc1.domain.com, the client will try to resolve this FQDN. If it cannot resolve the FQDN, it will start the AutoConnect process. But if it's able to resolve, it assumes the user is inside the network and Sophos Connect will not attempt to AutoConnect. The last option is Assign Client DNS Suffix. Adding a DNS suffix allows the endpoints to resolve the FQDN properly. For example, without a DNS suffix, if a user pinged DC1, no reply would be returned. But if it's added in, DC1 will have the domain appended so that DC1 becomes resolvable. With IPsec now configured, click Apply to save the changes. You're now ready to export the connection file, which is needed for configuring endpoints with the Sophos Connect client. We've linked a TechVid in the description that shows you how to do this. Now, let's get started with configuring SSL VPN. The setup process includes verifying the SSL VPN client network, configuring users and groups, or alternatively using AD Sync, checking the firewall authentication methods, and creating the SSL VPN policy. As mentioned before, Sophos Assistant also has an interactive guide that walks you through these steps directly in the SFOS user interface. Let's start by verifying the SSL VPN client network. In SFOS, navigate to Remote Access VPN and choose the SSL VPN tab. Click SSL VPN Global Settings. Ensure that the network matches your firewall rules from earlier, in this case 192.168.100.0/24, and does not overlap in your existing network. Other parameters, such as specifying a company signed certificate and cryptography settings, can be fine-tuned to suit your environment. Now, scroll to the bottom. Under Advanced Settings, we recommend leaving traffic compression disabled. Enabling this puts more load on your firewall. Simply ensure that compressed SSL VPN traffic is not selected. Go ahead and apply the changes. Now, configure the users and groups. If you plan on using or already have AD-Sync implemented, you can skip this section. You'll also find documentation linked in the video description for how to configure AD-Sync. Go to Authentication, Groups, and click Add. Name the policy. Then, set the surfing quota to Unlimited Internet Access, and access time to Allowed all the time. You can choose to set stricter surfing quotas and access hours to best suit your environment. Save the policy. Now, stay on the authentication page and navigate to Users. Here, select a user and add them to the VPN group that we just created. Then click Save. With that complete, we now need to set the firewall as the authentication server. If you plan on using Active Directory for authentication, we've linked documentation in the video description that covers this in detail. Otherwise, go to Authentication, Services. Under Firewall Authentication Methods, select Local for selected authentication server. Note, if you're using an external authentication server, such as an Active Directory server, be sure to select that from the authentication server list too. Now, scroll down to SSL VPN authentication methods. Make sure Local is also selected for selected authentication server. Click Apply to save the changes. Now that we've finished configuring the authentication server, create the SSL VPN policy. Go to Remote Access VPN, SSL VPN, and select Add. Name the policy and set a description if you'd like. For policy members, add in the group that was created earlier. For tunnel access, there's an option to Use as Default Gateway. Enabling this will send all traffic, including regular internet traffic, through the tunnel to the firewall, but this is optional. Note, this will reduce overall performance as the firewall will have to process more traffic, but it provides more reporting information about user traffic. In addition, if you do enable this setting, you must update any relevant firewall rules and add the WAN as a destination zone. In the permitted network resources, add in the subnets and any other IP addresses that the SSL VPN clients need access to. Lastly is the idle timeout section. Enabling disconnect idle clients will disconnect users that are idle for a set amount of time. This can be specified between the range of 15 to 360 minutes. With all the settings configured, apply this policy. And that completes the setup for SSL VPN in Sophos Firewall v20. If you need to set up Sophos Connect Client, refer to the tech vid linked in the description for detailed steps. So that covers IPsec and SSL VPN configuration in Sophos Firewall v20. I hope you found this video useful. Check out the relevant documentation linked in the video description. For further assistance, view and post questions on community.sophos.com, and go to techvids.sophos.com for more helpful videos like this one. Thanks for watching.